The judge had not moved in 4 minutes. She was looking at a photograph, 8 by 10, printed on plain paper, placed on the bench in front of her by the plaintiff's attorney 40 seconds into his opening statement. She had picked it up, looked at it, and had not set it down since. The bank's senior counsel, a composed man named Vance Pritchard, who had not lost a rural asset case in 6 years, was watching her from across the courtroom with the particular stillness of someone who has just realized that the room has changed temperature without anyone opening a window. The photograph showed a farmhouse, what was left of one, concrete foundation exposed to open sky, timber framing collapsed inward, a front door still hinged to a section of standing wall, leading nowhere, a wooden rocking chair visible in the rubble, one arm broken, the seat still intact, a coffee mug on what had been the kitchen windowsill, untouched, still upright, as if someone had set it there the evening before and stepped away for just a moment. The demolition had happened at 4 in the morning. Judge Sandra Howell set the photograph down. She looked at Vance Pritchard. She said, "Counselor, your client demolished an occupied structure." Pritchard said, "Your Honor, the property had been formally—" Judge Howell said, "I am looking at a coffee mug on a windowsill." She paused. "At 4 in the morning, Mr. Pritchard, people are not typically awake removing their coffee mugs from their windowsills before a demolition crew arrives." The courtroom was very quiet. Pritchard said nothing. Judge Howell looked at the photograph one more time. Then she set it down and looked at the camera footage log on the document in front of her. 14 hours of continuous recording, time-stamped, authenticated, submitted into evidence that morning by a 69-year-old grain farmer from central Nebraska who had set up 4 trail cameras on his own property 11 days before the bank sent a demolition crew at 4 in the morning. She looked up. She said, "Mr. Calloway, you may proceed." The plaintiff's attorney stood, and the story of how Clyde Harmon had ended up in this courtroom began to come clear. To understand what Clyde had known 11 days before the demolition crew arrived, you have to go back 14 months. Clyde Harmon was 69 years old. He had farmed the same 230 acres in Platte County, Nebraska his entire adult life. The farmhouse had been built by his grandfather in 1931, framed timber construction, 2 stories, a front porch that faced east so you could drink your morning coffee watching the light come up over the fields. Clyde had drunk his morning coffee on that porch for 41 years. He was not a complicated man. He paid what he owed. He kept what was his. He did not bother people, and he did not expect people to bother him. In 41 years of farming, he had never once been to a courthouse for anything other than a property tax payment. That changed 14 months before the demolition, when Consolidated Prairie Bank was acquired by a regional holding company called Vestmark Agricultural Finance. Clyde had financed his equipment through Consolidated Prairie Bank in 2009, a straightforward equipment loan, 5-year term, paid off in full in 2014. He had the payoff confirmation in a folder in his truck cab, where he kept important documents, not in a filing cabinet, not in a strongbox, in a manila folder in the passenger seat of his truck, because Clyde Harmon was a man who kept things where he could reach them. The payoff confirmation had been in that folder for 10 years. When Vestmark Agricultural Finance completed its acquisition of Consolidated Prairie Bank in the spring of the previous year, it inherited a loan portfolio of approximately 40,000 accounts. The migration of those accounts into Vestmark's system was handled by a team of 12 people over a period of 4 months. Clyde's equipment loan appeared in the new system as open. The payoff record from 2014 had not transferred. Vestmark's automated collection system flagged the account in August. A collections manager named Derek Sowell reviewed it for 3 minutes, confirmed the system showed an open balance, and initiated standard recovery proceedings. He did not call Clyde. He did not send a preliminary inquiry. He sent a formal notice of default and intent to recover collateral. Clyde received it on a Tuesday afternoon. He read it standing beside his truck in the equipment yard. Then he reached into the passenger seat, opened the manila folder, and took out the 2014 payoff confirmation. He called the number on the notice. He waited 24 minutes. When someone answered, he explained the situation clearly. The loan had been paid off in 2014. He had the confirmation. He could fax it, mail it, or drive it to their office. The representative said she would note the dispute in the system and someone would follow up. No one followed up. A second notice arrived 3 weeks later. This one referenced the farmhouse as additional collateral under the original loan agreement. Clyde read that line twice. The farmhouse had never been listed as collateral. The 2009 loan had been secured against the equipment only. He had the original agreement in the same manila folder as the payoff confirmation. He called again. He waited 31 minutes. The representative who answered confirmed that according to their system, the farmhouse was listed as secondary collateral. She said it was in the documentation. Clyde said it was not in his documentation. She said she would escalate the dispute. 2 weeks later, a certified letter arrived. Vestmark Agricultural Finance had initiated formal foreclosure proceedings against the Clyde Harmon property, including all structures, on February 20th, the basis of an outstanding equipment loan balance and secondary collateral provisions. Clyde sat in his truck in the equipment yard for a long time after reading that letter. Then he called his neighbor, a man named Gene Purcell, who had farmed the adjacent land for 30 years and whose son worked as a county deputy. Gene listened to the whole thing. Then he said, "Clyde, you need a lawyer, and you need one today." Clyde said he knew that. Then he said, "But first, I need to make a stop at the hardware store." Gene asked, "What for?" Clyde said, "Trail cameras." He bought 4 of them, the same kind he used for deer season, motion-activated, weatherproof, capable of continuous recording when set to video mode. He mounted them himself the following morning, one on the east fence post facing the farmhouse, one on the equipment shed roof facing the driveway entrance, one on the water tower at the north edge of the property facing the access road, one inside the farmhouse itself, mounted high on the living room wall, angled to cover the front door and the main ground floor. He set all 4 to continuous video recording. He did not tell anyone except his lawyer. His lawyer was a woman named Ruth Calloway, 55 years old, Fremont, Nebraska, 28 years of banking and property law, a woman who had the focused energy of someone who did not waste time on anything that did not move the case forward. Ruth reviewed the manila folder the morning after Clyde called her. The original 2009 equipment loan agreement, the payment history, the 2014 payoff confirmation, and the original loan collateral schedule, which listed precisely what had been secured against the loan: farm equipment, specifically itemized, 4 pieces. The farmhouse was not on the list. Ruth set the collateral schedule beside Vestmark's foreclosure notice. She said, "They added the farmhouse to the collateral record after the acquisition. It is not in your original agreement." She looked at Clyde. "This is not a documentation dispute. This is a falsified collateral record." Clyde said, "Can you prove that?" Ruth said, "Your original agreement proves it. The question is whether they understand yet what they have done." She paused. "File the legal response today. In the meantime, keep those cameras running." Clyde said he intended to. Ruth filed the formal dispute that afternoon, 26 pages, the original loan agreement, the collateral schedule, the payoff confirmation, a detailed legal argument that the farmhouse had never been included in the collateral and that Vestmark's foreclosure notice was based on a record that did not match the original executed document. Vestmark's legal department received it on a Thursday. They did not respond for 11 days. On the 12th day, at 4:17 in the morning, a demolition crew arrived at Clyde Harmon's property. 3 vehicles, an excavator on a flatbed, 2 men with equipment, a site supervisor with a clipboard, and a Vestmark Agricultural Finance authorization document dated 4 days earlier. The east fence camera recorded them turning onto the access road at 4:11. The driveway camera recorded them unloading the excavator at 4:19. The living room camera recorded the front door opening at 4:26, pushed from the outside, and the beam of a flashlight moving across the room. The east fence camera recorded the excavator arm making first contact with the north wall of the farmhouse at 4:31 in the morning. All 4 cameras recorded everything that followed. Clyde was not at the farmhouse that night. He was at his brother's place 12 miles east, where Ruth had advised him to stay after filing the dispute, understanding that the situation had become unpredictable. His phone rang at 4:43. It was the motion alert from the east fence camera. He sat up in the dark and opened the live feed on his phone. He watched his farmhouse come down. He did not call anyone. He did not drive out there. He sat in the dark in his brother's spare room and watched the cameras record everything. And when it was over, he called Ruth and told her what had happened. Ruth was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Are all 4 cameras still running?" Clyde said yes. Ruth said, "Do not touch them. Do not go to the property until I tell you." She paused. "Clyde, do you understand what they just did?" He said he did. Ruth said, "They demolished a structure while a formal legal dispute was active and filed. They did it without notice. They did it at 4 in the morning, and you have 14 hours of footage from 4 angles. Another pause. She said, they just made this very simple. Ruth filed the emergency motion at 7:30 that morning. Not a standard legal response, an emergency injunction request, accompanied by authenticated copies of all 4 camera feeds, timestamped and submitted as evidence. Wrongful demolition of a private structure during active legal dispute, destruction of property, falsification of collateral records, and a formal criminal referral to the Nebraska Department of Banking and Finance regarding the alteration of loan documentation post-acquisition. The emergency hearing was granted for the following Tuesday. Vestmark Agricultural Finance received the motion on Monday morning. Their senior counsel, Vance Pritchard, reviewed the camera footage that afternoon. He watched the excavator arm make contact with the north wall at 4:31 in the morning. He watched the front door being pushed open from the outside at 4:26. He watched the coffee mug on the kitchen windowsill remain untouched through the entire recording, sitting there in the beam of the equipment lights while the walls around it came down. He called his supervisor. His supervisor called Vestmark's chief legal officer. The chief legal officer watched the footage. Then she said 4 words. How did he know? The hearing was held on a Tuesday morning in Platte County District Court. Vance Pritchard arrived with 2 associates and a confidence that had not yet fully accounted for what was about to happen. He had prepared arguments around the authorization document, the foreclosure proceedings, the collateral provisions. He had not prepared for 14 hours of continuous footage from 4 angles. Ruth Calloway placed the photograph on the bench 40 seconds into her opening statement. The farmhouse. What remained of it? The coffee mug on the windowsill. Judge Sandra Howell picked it up and did not set it down for 4 minutes. Then she looked at Pritchard and said, "Counselor, your client demolished an occupied structure." Pritchard said, "Your Honor, the property had been formally." Judge Howell said, "I am looking at a coffee mug on a windowsill." She set the photograph down. At 4 in the morning, Mr. Pritchard, people are not typically awake removing their belongings before a demolition crew arrives unannounced. Pritchard said, "The authorization document," Judge Howell said, "was issued 4 days after a formal legal dispute had been filed and served on your client." She looked at the footage log. "Your client received that dispute filing on a Thursday. The demolition authorization was dated the following Monday." She looked up. "Are you telling this court that your client reviewed a 26-page legal dispute, consulted counsel, and decided the appropriate response was to send a demolition crew at 4 in the morning?" The courtroom was silent. Pritchard had no answer that helped him. Ruth Calloway stood. She said, "Your Honor, we are asking the court to address 4 things. First, full compensation for the wrongful demolition of the Harmon farmhouse, valued at current replacement cost. Second, complete discharge of the claimed loan balance, which our documentation shows was paid in full in 2014. Third, statutory damages under Nebraska Consumer Protection Law for the falsification of collateral records post-acquisition. And fourth, referral of Vestmark Agricultural Finance's loan documentation practices to the Nebraska Department of Banking and Finance for formal investigation." She set a second document on the bench, the original 2009 collateral schedule, the farmhouse, not on it, anywhere. Judge Howell read it carefully. Then she looked at Pritchard one more time. She said, "Counselor, is the farmhouse listed in this document?" Pritchard looked at the collateral schedule. He said, "Your Honor, during the acquisition process, certain records were." Judge Howell said, "Is the farmhouse listed in this document?" A long pause. Pritchard said, "No, Your Honor." Judge Howell looked back at her papers. "The loan balance claimed by Vestmark Agricultural Finance is discharged in full. The original 2014 payoff stands as documented. The demolition of the Harmon farmhouse was unlawful, conducted during active legal dispute, without proper notice, and against a structure not included in the original collateral agreement. Damages are awarded at full replacement cost, plus statutory penalties." She picked up her pen. "Total judgment for the plaintiff, $431,000. She set her pen down. "Furthermore, this court is referring Vestmark Agricultural Finance's post-acquisition loan documentation practices to the Nebraska Department of Banking and Finance and to the Office of the Nebraska Attorney General." She closed the file. Vance Pritchard gathered his papers without speaking. Ruth Calloway placed her hand on the table beside Clyde. Clyde looked straight ahead for a moment. Then he looked at the photograph still sitting on the judge's bench. The farmhouse, what remained of it, the coffee mug on the windowsill. He had drunk his morning coffee on that porch for 41 years. He would not be drinking it there again. But that was not the part that settled in him as he sat in that courtroom on a Tuesday morning in Platte County. What settled in him was simpler than that. They had come at 4 in the morning because they thought the dark would hide what they were doing. He had put 4 cameras up because he had understood something about people who move in the dark. They always forget that someone might be watching. Vestmark Agricultural Finance paid the judgment in full within 30 days, $431,000. The Nebraska Department of Banking and Finance opened a formal investigation into Vestmark's post-acquisition loan documentation practices within 6 weeks of the referral. They found altered collateral records in 38 other accounts. 19 of those accounts involved properties that had been flagged for recovery proceedings. 6 families had already lost assets. All 6 cases were reopened. Derek Sowell, the collections manager who had initiated recovery proceedings on Clyde's account after a 3-minute review, resigned from Vestmark Agricultural Finance before the investigation concluded. Vance Pritchard did not take another Vestmark case. Clyde used part of the settlement to build a new house. Same location, same orientation, facing east so the front porch caught the morning light coming up over the fields. He did not try to replicate what had been there before. He built something new on the same ground, which was not the same thing as forgetting what had stood there, but was not the same thing as being stopped by it either. On the morning the new porch was finished, he made a cup of coffee, carried it outside, and sat in a new chair facing the same fields his grandfather had first broken in the years before the original house was built. The fields looked the same as they always had. The light came up the same way it always had. He drank his coffee and watched it. Then he set the mug on the new porch railing, went inside, and got to work. Because the fields did not wait. They never had. And whatever had been taken from him in the dark at 4 in the morning had not taken that. If this story meant something to you, subscribe. Hit the bell so you never miss what comes next. We will see you tomorrow.